Welcome, and we're going to jump right into today's agenda, but before doing so, if the secretary would please note for the record that Vice Chair Miller is here, Director Camacho is here, and we are missing today Director Gilmetti. So we'll move on. If you would give the public the instructions on how they can address this committee, Mr. Chairman or Mr. Secretary.
1 second, Chair Richardson. I apologize. There's some technical difficulty. We'll be right there. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody to the High-Speed Rail Finance and Audit Committee meeting. If there are any public comments, if you can log into Zoom and raise your hand with the raise your hand feature, we will call on you by the order that we receive your name. If there's any public comments in the room, if you can please bring me your card, we will read your comments in the order that we receive them.
There are no public comments.
There are no public comments. Chair Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So we'll move on, ladies and gentlemen, to today's agenda. Seeing no public comment, item number 1 this morning is the November meeting minutes. We also, well, we'll just leave it with that. So at this point, unless there are no changes, is there a motion for approval?
Not November.
What am I seeing here? Am I looking on?
So move February minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was looking on the minutes from before. So I apologize, Director Miller. We will be. Let's look at the February 16th, 23 and the March 16th, 23, and if we could have a motion for both of those.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? Director Camacho? Passed unanimously. We'll move on to item number 3 now, which is the independent peer review from our internal audit manager, Paula Rivera. Good morning.
Good morning. Chair Richards, member of the Finance and Audit Committee. I bring to you today the results of our peer review. Our audit standards require that we have an external peer review at least every 3 years. And our last one was in 2020. The current peer review was performed by a local group called CASA, the California Association of State Auditors. We perform peer reviews for other departments. The peer review was performed by senior managers, one from Caltrans, one from franchise tax, and one from lottery. So they came in, they looked at how our system of quality control is designed to see if it was designed effectively. And then they looked to see some of our audits and some of the other things that we do to see if we're following our own quality control system, and they found that we are. So the report had no reportable conditions. They did identify one area where we hadn't been documenting our decisions for who to assign to an audit and what their competencies were. We have lots of conversations about who we assign to an audit, but we didn't do a good job of documenting it. So we've improved our processes. We're documenting that information now, and we've resolved.
So in
that-
other words, within the, within your team, they're interested in noting if you assign out an audit for a specific purpose, that auditor has experience in that area? Is that what they're doing?
Yes. Or experience with the particular audit standards or whatever expertise they need to perform that audit.
I see. Has that been something that's been stated in the past or noted in the past? I don't recall ever having seen that before.
It's been part of the audit standards and it's always been part of our conversation.
I see.
It's just never been
Never been written out.
documented.
Okay. Any other comments with regards to this? No?
Just that I'm very proud of the audit office. They've worked really hard
Yeah,
through the pandemic and maintained the same standards that we've always had. So
thank you.
I am really proud of what they've been able to do.
Okay. And I also have an opportunity when this occurs, both to get interviewed and have a chance to ask questions. And as usual, and I would say that it is true, as usual, they had really glowing comments with regards to the audit office that you're running. And they echo our feelings about how this has been such an important part of this organization forever. And so congratulations for that.
Thank you.
So that's just an information item, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, well, let's carry on.
Okay.
Next.
The next item, the next item I have is the audit plan and our internal quality review. So the way our quality control system is designed is each year that we don't have an external peer review, we perform an internal peer review. So we have the auditors go and look at each other's work papers. Did they follow the quality control standards? Is everything that needed to be in the work papers? Can they find it? They found a couple of things that maybe wasn't in the table of contents or numbering was off, but they didn't find any issues in our internal review either, where our quality control system wasn't functioning as intended. So that's the look back. The look forward is the audit plan for this next fiscal year.
Mhm.
So we have three carryover audits. We have an incurred cost audit that we're working on for the regional consultant contract from Bakersfield to Palmdale. We have an audit of small business compliance in progress, and we're continuing to work on pre-award evaluations. We have one that we just finished, we'll issue maybe today, one that is in process, and one that's coming up in August and September. So that's our carryover work. The two audits that we've proposed for the upcoming year are civil work certification. As the construction design build contracts come to an end, there's a certification process, and we are going to take a look at the process and the information to see if it complies. If it doesn't, there's time to correct. Or if there are some procedural issues, we can identify that so that CP1 and CP23 can incorporate those lessons learned.
Okay.
Question,
Yes, please go ahead.
Paulo, the small business compliance, who do you auditing? Who do you audit?
Both the authority, we have two objectives in that audit. One objective is to identify if the reporting process is functioning as intended. So we're looking at the authority. What information do you gather? How do you retain that information? And how does that get transferred into the reporting to the feds and to the State Department of General Services. And the second objective is to look at the consultants. The universe of contracts that we could look at is anybody who has the 30% small business identified in their contract. And we will go and meet with them to understand, are you complying with the 30%? If you're not complying, what are your good faith efforts? How have you documented what you're looking for? Is it that there aren't enough firms in a particular area? Is it something that we haven't thought of? Is it that it's an aspirational goal? So we're going to speak with the consultants to understand the information behind the numbers that are being reported.
We have never met the 30% in total. We have always run, as I recall, in the 22 point some percent, 23% or something like that. And that number has remained static for several years. I mean, does your audit show maybe what we could be doing better?
We're going to look to see if we can identify why we're not meeting those numbers. And then once there's a possibility that the records are poor and we won't know why. But until we talk to the prime consultants to understand, we won't know where we are. But that's our next step. We've done our interviews. We've developed our understanding of what the process should be. So starting in August, we will be working with the firms to understand what efforts they're putting forth to meet those goals.
Thank you.
Well, and what Ernie's, you know that this has always been a major concern of this committee and the board. And what Director Camacho has indicated, I mean, it's consistently been at mostly in the last couple of years or so, 22 to 23%. So nobody has ever suggested we should be giving up on it. What we are concerned about is it beyond grasp? And if it's not, or what are we doing? How do we increase the performance? Because it's critically important for the project and certainly for the direction of the board and the efforts of management. So if I assume we are going to report out that portion of in your audit report also, so we can have a better understanding. I'm not sure that if you've got comments or suggestions that you want to identify to us, that is it a goal that we can't meet? Or if it isn't, or can we do a better job at it? And we're hoping that it's a better job at it. But it's embarrassing really that we have, we sit at the same level. And I know that we've always talked about, we would have expectations that number will go up substantially as a result of the ramping up of construction. So I'm looking forward to that report coming back to the board.
Thank you.
Okay,
May I?
sure, please.
So I think those are all great comments. I still think our goal is more ambitious than other state departments. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
And how ambitious are we? I mean, what do other state departments do?
The state requirement from the Department of General Services is 25% commitment to small businesses for state funds. The federal funds requirement is 10% of disadvantaged business enterprises. And then the state requirement for disabled veterans business enterprises is 3%.
So
So
do you?
there are
Sorry.
parts to the
Cool.
goal that there's been a fair amount of misunderstanding. And our small business program is working very hard to clarify the program, clarify what the goals mean, what the expectations are. But so those, one is commitments, one is expenditures, state funds, federal funds. There's an awful lot that goes into that.
Right. In this area, I know that we're always trying to meet that 30%,
Yes.
but there are variations like the 3%, the 10, and I'd like it to be broken out, and maybe you're doing that already,
The
which
small
is in
business
those,
program is.
yeah, in those different areas. Because I know when I've attended our small business, I forget what we call that committee.
Business Advisory
The
Council.
BAC, Right. I mean, there's a lot of interest and enthusiasm given given that our goal is so much higher than other state departments, which is great. And so that we haven't met it, I kind of understand because I think the state has a hard time sometimes meeting those goals. But I think that it's incumbent upon us to, as my colleagues have said, to really figure out like where can we do a better job to meet the goals. But it is a goal and we've done fairly well to hit the 23%. I think in the other state departments I work with, it's usually around 15% to 10. So I think we're doing a good job there, but it'd be nice to do better. Thank you.
If I could just make a comment on this. This is ongoing activity that we're doing with the Business Advisory Council and our small business partners. That council has expanded its universe of people on it, and we are working with them now on how we report out these numbers, because one thing that I think is important to realize is that when we just throw out a 30% goal, that does not align well with what state and federal standards are, federal and state standards based on the dollars in a contract. None of them have that kind of a requirement, and the reporting is different at the state level and the federal level. And so what we're trying to do is align how we report to be in line with what normal contracting procedures are. I just say for the board too, that just for FYI, for professional services contracts and A&E, most of our A&E contracts, we are at around the 30% number. It's the larger dollar value construction contracts that we're behind. And that has always been the case here. We have done some things to improve that. That number has improved slightly over the years. But that 30% on that is a tough number for those three contracts that are in place now. As we go forward, we'll examine how to do more. We do more engagement with small businesses broadly now than we used to do. And as I said, our small business group is working with the BAC on aligning more consistently our reporting of these objectives with what state and federal law requires. And I think it's important for the board to understand there are differences. When we just say 30%, it really breaks down beyond that. And it also depends on whether you're talking about state dollars or federal dollars. So it's just a different thing.
Brian, can we get a breakout of that report, which shows the percentages?
Yeah, some of it is in what we've used at FNA before in terms of where we are on that, but we can do a breakout through the small business group. They have the data on the differences between professional services contracts versus the construction contracts, as well as where we are on federal standards versus state standards. Because again, just to give you an example of a difference, as Paula rightly stated, if it's federal dollars only on a contract, the standard for disabled businesses, or not disabled, but disadvantaged businesses is, I think it's 10% or something like that. And so at Caltrans, if there's a single dollar on a contract, one single federal dollar on a contract, their standard is the federal standard. And so they're at 17%, which is crushing the 10%, but it ain't 30, right? And so we really do have to go through what are the standards based on the dollars in the contract? How are we reporting it? What's the best way to make the 30% standard work? And we're working on it. Again, we can provide to the board where we are on the different types of contracts. And I think it would be
Thank you.
useful. Yeah.
I agree. That's a good approach, Brian. And if I can just ask Alicia on this item, I'm not sure if it's stated correctly. Are we supposed to be approving item number 4 here, or is it that we're recommending approval to the board? Or are we doing anything?
It's just
It says
informational here.
They're approving.
Yeah, but I think you're correct. I think on the status of it is the information.
Yeah.
The wording.
Yeah, okay, so it's simply information here, so it's not that we're gonna recommend to the board that this committee recommends that they approve this. We're not gonna do that.
I mean, I think the committee could.
Yeah, well, why don't we, maybe that would help with the board, but so if we could craft this, then do we have a motion for approving this committee recommending?
I'm sorry, I didn't maybe say that right. So
Oh.
it's an informational item
Mhm.
at this meeting. I think at board meeting, this committee could speak to the fact that you've spent time.
Oh,
reviewing
okay,
this and
all
you
right, we're making an informal approval, our recommendation if we did that way. Okay, fine. Paula, let's go on to the next item.
Okay. The program schedule management audit report. So we performed this audit to determine if the processes and procedures for managing the master program schedule are documented, followed, and supported. The scope of our audit was May 1st, 2019 through April 30th, 2022. Our audit found that there were documented processes in place and schedule management practices generally complied with the procedures. We would like to acknowledge that the process improvement efforts of the program controls branch and the scheduling unit were evident during the later part of our audit. Specifically, the improvement in documentation of their review and reports used during their monthly schedule review. However, there are no written procedures for managing the master program schedule elements outside of the construction packages, and the documented processes do not fully align with the current practices in place. Also, process and procedure documents for scheduling are not consistent and need to be revised, then approved per authority procedures. In addition, the monthly review process lacks supporting documentation, and the program's controls scheduling unit does not have an employee contingency plan, which coupled with the outdated procedures could lead to inconsistencies in the work performed.
Paul, are you able to recall, has your office audited this before?
No, this is the first
This is
time
the
we've
first time,
looked
okay.
at the program
Okay.
schedule process.
All right, well, I suspect it's long overdue, and it's also important, so I was just concerned about the last paragraph on page 3 and its implications and how we would, not only how we necessarily got here, but making sure that we make these appropriate improvements. So,
So
Can I ask a
the
question?
mitigation efforts for that are that there was an extended period for the RDP contract staff, which is an overlap with the new PDS contract staff. So they've mitigated the risk.
mhm.
As with lots of things in the authority, we have good people doing the right things. But it's not documented. There was no plan. We weren't following the plan. We have good people who are doing the right things.
Any questions or comments from my colleagues on this item?
I was just going to ask a question of, it's more just my understanding, which is what are the program schedule elements outside the construction packages? Is
So
this
the-
like right of way? Are we talking pre-development kind of activities or budget schedule or?
It's the schedule that extends past the 3 construction packages. So
Oh.
track and systems, rolling stock,
It's
those
hard for
things that
me-
are happening in the future, the design. So when
Understood.
when
That-
we interviewed people to understand the process, we heard lots of collaboration, lots of meetings, lots of discussion, lots of really good processes happening. They're just not documented. So they rely on the good people who are working in those positions right now. So we're recommending that there's a process and a procedure for how those elements outside of the design build contracts are managed within the schedule.
And just to be clear here, we have a master schedule for all of the elements we were working on. It's articulated through the project update report, but it's also, it relates to all the things we're doing on upcoming procurements to advance track work and other things as we complete the 3 construction items. It involves completing the environmental documents, the timing for that, and all of the things to ultimately get to an operational service by the end of the decade, which is our objective. So we have a master schedule that our project controls PMO office handles. And I think the issue here is, are the written procedures up to date? So if there's staff turnover or other things, everybody comes in and is on the same page for how we move these things forward. And I think in response to the audit, the project schedule office is updating those procedures to include those written documentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Any other questions or comments regarding this item? If there isn't, Paula, I think what is the next one? The environmental services? You
Yes.
said Fresno, okay.
So we have four pre-award review reports today. And I wanted to give a little bit of a background of why we do these, what they involve, and then what you're seeing. So these are only performed when we have a procurement that's based on qualifications. So the most qualified firm is selected to negotiate with, and part of that negotiation is they submit a cost proposal. And we review that cost proposal to see if the cost proposed comply with the federal regulations and the agreement, the proposed agreement. So we're looking to see that the labor rates are based on actual cost, that the indirect cost rates comply with the federal regulations, and then any other direct costs that are proposed, travel, those are identified in the cost proposal to comply with the California state travel regulations. So the work we do in a pre-award is designed to assist the contract manager and their procurement team in completing negotiations. They're done before we have a contract, and the recommendations are incorporated into the agreement before it's executed. So a lot of the things that we report are the appearance of the cost proposal. You don't have the right footnote. You need to have an updated indirect rate. You've proposed a rate or a range for a classification, say senior engineer, and that rate couldn't be supported. You say the range is something to something, and when we look like, oh, well, it's $5 less on the low, or you've overestimated the high. And so we're bringing the cost proposal, those proposed costs in line with what can be supported.
And again, how are they supported? Is there
Uh,
some manual or something? How do we determine what's supported?
For the payroll, the proposed hourly rates, we look at payroll.
Okay,
For the indirect cost rates, we look at an indirect cost schedule that identifies their direct labor and all of their indirect costs. And we look to see that there are only allowable costs included in those rates, that the PPP loans have been properly accounted for, that they don't have alcoholic beverages, sports ticket, those sort of entertainment type things that are unallowable costs. In my opinion, they're very valuable because sometimes for the smaller firms, it's their first interaction with a government contract. And the questions that we're asking in this pre-award, granted, are very condensed. It's usually a 3 or 4 week process, but it's very similar to what they would have to produce in an audit.
I see.
So it gives them an idea of the type of documentation they need to maintain, the type of questions they need to be prepared to answer. And it sets us on the right path, that the first year of a contract, we're confident that the costs are supported.
Any questions from the committee?
Yes. Do some of the smaller firms, if they've never been audited before, so that do they operate on a provisional rate?
Occasionally, but not often. If we had maybe 2 or 3 this year that had just started, like, hey, I just started in November or February. In that case, we don't have a full year of cost data to be able to evaluate an indirect rate. The federal regs allow for a price evaluation. So we will look to see the prices that they've been invoicing on other government contracts for similar work.
Safe harbor rates?
The Federal Railroad Administration does not have a safe harbor rate. It's not something that the authority is authorized to. Caltrans does. Federal Highways has a safe harbor rate, and they've delegated the management of that safe harbor rate to Caltrans.
Can you just tell us what a safe harbor rate is?
Oh, sure. Sorry.
No,
A safe
He already knows. but fine.
A safe harbor rate is something that's designed to be used in the first 3 years that a business is starting up. It is a rate of 120% that they can use as a substitute overhead rate until they have cost data and a financial management system that can support that rate.
I see.
There are times when the safe harbor rate can be helpful, but there are also times when it disadvantages them. Sometimes small firms have high upfront costs in those first years and not as much direct labor. So they aren't able to recover all of the costs that they are incurring in those first couple years. So it is beneficial while you develop the expertise and you get your advisors and you put your system in place, but it's not one size fits all. We try to work with each firm and whatever situation they have. If they don't have any cost data, we'll look at prices they've been charging to other government contracts. If they have a part year, we'll look to see if that's representative and we'll use that. If they've got 3 years of information, but it's fluctuated widely, we can average those indirect rates for something that would likely be more representative of what's going to happen. The authority contracts are based on actual costs, at least these contracts. And every year their indirect rate gets to be resubmitted. So at Caltrans, if you're using a safe harbor rate in the first year of a contract, some of those contracts are specified hourly rates, so you're locked into that rate for 3 years. The authority contracts are a little bit different in that each year an indirect rate is calculated and then it's incorporated into the following year's invoicing.
This whole issue that we were talking about before, the 30%, for some of the small businesses, which typically that group falls into, it is difficult, as my colleague, Mr. Camacho was saying, for them to sometimes understand what is going to be needed in terms of reporting. Do you ever make presentations to the BAC about what information you're looking for to
I do.
help? Okay.
I do.
Because I do know in the ones that I've attended, that is a recurring issue where they talk about, being audited or having to provide information that they're not quite set up always to handle.
Yes.
All right. So,
And what we've started doing is making presentations to individual contracts. Like for the PDS contract, they offered to all of their subs, not just their small business subs, but all of their subs. And we had a training session where we went through, here are the type of things that you need to maintain and accumulate for an audit. When we come in, here's what we'll ask. So we're trying to set them up to succeed as
Okay.
opposed to coming in 9 years later and saying, ta-da, show me
Yeah.
your records.
okay. And you do this on pre-bid, pre-award type informational meetings?
The presentation to the Business Advisory Council is every couple years. These presentations we make for a specific contract is after it's executed.
Okay.
So
So maybe that's something, just because we're trying to increase our percentage here. And I do know that sentiment has been expressed at the BAC, which is for small businesses, sometimes the cost of a state contract is, the back end of it, which is all this reporting requirement, is daunting to them. So the easier we can make it, the more likely they are to bid. So maybe in your audit that you're doing, just ask that question and see what that response is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify one thing? The work you do at the back, you described as post-audit, but just to be very clear, the 4 reviews that are in here in front of the board are pre-audits.
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Any other questions? All right, go ahead, Paula.
I think that's it, unless you have specific questions about any of the 4 contracts that we looked at.
Any questions? Okay. Paula, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item 6 is the any comments that I have. The only question I had, and maybe it's Brian Ennis, Is Brian here? Okay. I was just, oh, there you are, Brian.
Early.
I didn't expect you to be standing up yet. So is there anything new on the IG?
Okay.
Yeah, the process for the IG to come into this program is 3 candidates being nominated by the legislature to the governor's office. At the middle toward the end of June, those nominations were made. So the governor's office now has 3 candidates in front of it. All of the candidates have auditing backgrounds. They're all either state or local auditor experience. And the governor's office is just beginning the vetting process now on those 3. So that's where it stands.
Thank you. With that then, Brian, you're up.
Great. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I believe we'll have a PowerPoint up here. So we start with the accounts payable, aging and disputes report, and that's fairly similar to last month and last year. Happy to say we have incurred no late payment penalties now for over 6 years, and our disputes are about $138 million currently. And for a long time, the disputes have been largely with the Dragados contract. And so I think in this case, about 99% of the
And Brian, are you
disputes in
going through
dollars.
this PowerPoint? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, it's the
It's just not on the screen as always.
tab 7 on, I believe, on your binder.
No, I knew that part, but I don't know what this is. Is this?
That is the next presentation by Daniel Horgan.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, I'm on this one. I just didn't know if when you said.
And Tom, just if we can't pull these things up on the screen, we can now. Okay. There have been some intermittent Wi-Fi issues in the building this morning, so
Yeah, I
that's why.
understood that. Okay, go ahead.
All right.
I just didn't want anybody in the audience to be confused that you're talking about a PowerPoint and they don't see it. So go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, so this is page 2 of the PowerPoint, if for those that can see it, and bottom half talks about cash management. A couple updates since the last F&A meeting. We have been able to bank now the February cap and trade auction proceeds of 220 million, so that's reflected in our proceeds. And of course, in March, we sold 1.1 billion of Prop 1A bonds. So that's reflected. The month over month change, you'll note the Prop 1A falling from about 1.2 billion to 944 million. That's due to the April month, but also due to a reallocation of prior expenditures earlier in this fiscal year. We initially used cap and trade in July through January expenditures, and we have been reallocating that to Prop 1A. We just had to wait till the proceeds were available to us before we could use 1A, but what do you call it? Generally our expenditures now are covered with 1A, where 1A is eligible because that's a more restrictive fund source, and the legislature directed that specifically to the Central Valley work. Cap and trade, as you'll see, fell month over month, increased month over month from about 1.9 billion to 2.4 billion, both as a factor of that February auction amount being credited and also the reallocation of some prior months expenditures. We still do not reflect in this the May cap and trade auction. We expect to get about 244 million from that auction. And I believe we actually not reflected here, but I think we got that in the last day or two. So it looks like that's good. And again, adds about 240 million for the month of May. Property fund balance is about the same, about 11 million.
Brian, I'm going to just ask you a question out of from the private sector and not on, I've never thought about it before. All of these funds that we have, are these funds that are sitting in some sort of an account that we could be drawing interest or anything on? Are we drawing on interest on all this?
Yes, we do on the Prop 1A. Cap and trade is sort of a shared account. We did receive some interest on cap and trade when there was a budget action 7, 8 years ago and some was loaned to the general fund, and we received interest on that. We don't tend to receive, though, regularly interest on cap and trade because that's sort of a shared fund.
I see. Do we have a record of how much interest we've earned anywhere?
That is in the cap and trade money is in a fund called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that's in the California Air Resources Board budget. So in the budget documents, there's a fund condition where they do list the interest overall. We don't, nothing specific, again, is attributed to high-speed rail from that interest.
I've just never heard anybody, you ever say that, so we got X number of dollars of interest, which was the cause of an increase in our whatever.
Right. I believe, I guess, being a little dismal on the Prop 1A, my understanding is we do receive interest on that, but it doesn't add to the $9 billion that ultimately the voters approved for Prop 1A for high-speed rail. So again, it just changes the mix of where the dollars come from, but it's still.
That's what I was looking for. So do we? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that won't work. Got it.
Good try.
Okay.
So we got that 5 million or so from the general fund loan in interest. That was a net gain for us. But other than that, interest isn't in the end helping us.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So the administrative budget, we spent 6.6 million in the month of April, which you'll note is up about 1.2 million year over year. And that's really driven primarily by filling about 59 vacant positions over that time period. And our current vacancy rate is about 18.6%, which is, as it happens, is a bit below the statewide average right now, which is running around 20%. Next slide. Our capital outlay budget, we reflect expenditures in April of 127 million, which is both up over March and up year over year from April of 22. In the middle of the page, we list that by design build contract, 54 million related to CP1, 23 million CP23, and 7 million CP4. CP1 was higher in part because there was a large payment of 18.5 million associated with wet utilities on Church Avenue. So our year-to-date expenditures are at the bottom of the sheet, $942 million through April. And in a few slides, I'll get to the flash
So
report.
the 941 versus the forecast for at 1.8 million.
That's correct. That's the forecast for the fiscal year
You're right.
through June.
And this is
correct?
through April.
Correct. Yeah, it looks like with the trend, we, May, as I'll have a slide in a few slides, but May looks like about 145 million. And then if we have a similar amount in June, we'd be looking at about 1.2 billion for the fiscal year. Next slide, please. Total project expenditures since 2006 are now about $10.8 billion. At the bottom half here, we look at the federal grants awarded. Of course, there was an announcement yesterday. I know Chair Richards, you were at. So we, happy about that $20 million raise grant that was awarded yesterday in Fresno. That's, the third raise grant in a row we've been awarded. We have a couple other grants in the hopper. We have a Chrissy grant that we expect to have a decision on around August of this year. And in that Chrissy grant, we had requested money for 6 grade separations in Shafter, about 230 million. We had an earlier decision on a grant called Railroad Crossing Elimination that was not favorable. We did not win a grant through that program. However, the scope is the same as what's in the Chrissy grant, which we are looking to August to see what the federal decision is. So I think we can look for some news in August. And then the biggest grant application, of course, is that federal state, and that's expected to have an award in November, December. So
Okay.
that's the status of the grant funding. Next slide. Contract and expenditure report, fairly similar month over month. We're up about 100 million in total value of active contracts to 11.7 billion. There were about 12.6 million in design build contract change orders. And there were contract amendments and some new contracts, the largest of which was the design contract for the Central Valley Station, the Central Valley Stations. And that was a contract award for this notice to proceed of $35 million. As was discussed earlier, our small business utilization rate is holding fairly steady month over month, year over year. In April, about 23.4%. Next slide, please. Contingency summary. The top part of the chart shows our contingency balance for the 4 construction packages at about $2.1 billion. And again, in the month of April, we utilized about 12.6 million of that on change orders, and those individual change orders are itemized in the construction Central Valley status report. Next slide, please. This is our last slide on the financial report, and this is preliminary data for the month of May. So expenditures were up in May, month over month, to 146 million in May. And breaking it down by the construction packages, both CP1 and CP2 were in the $45 million range. For May, CP4 was 7.4 million. We filled another few positions in the month of May. Now we're down to, or I should maybe say it this way, up to 354 positions filled. And lastly, we summarize our grant applications outstanding here. And the one new application we submitted was to a program called the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership. So this is one we haven't included on prior summaries to the board, but our grants team found this one and found we were eligible for it. It's not a Department of Transportation grant program. It's a U.S. Department of Energy grant program. So typically the recipients are utility companies, but with our solar and battery system for our Central Valley electrified rail service, we think we qualify, and we would in fact provide benefits to the grid. Because we would be able to provide our own power on hot days and have battery storage as well. So that would promote grid resilience. So we're giving that one a try. We applied for $53 million for that program. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Annis? Can I ask Brian Kelly, not for a lengthy one, but since we might have a couple of minutes, yeah, this the whole thing with the solar arrays and properties and all that sort of stuff. So what is our plan? I mean, I think it's pretty exciting and and I'm happy to hear about it, but I don't think we know much about it. We haven't, are we talking about putting solar farms on properties, excess properties that we purchased?
Yeah, we did a large land management assessment some time ago that Meg Cedarath, our sustainability and planning folks, spearheaded, and now with our real property folks. And we have sufficient right-of-way in places for solar panel installation and incorporating that with some battery storage technology so that we can, to the maximum extent possible, be as self-sustaining as possible with train operations, and then and with at least providing some relief from the peak, especially in the summer, on demand for electricity in the valley. So it's an ability for us to be a bit more self-sustaining. I think the magnitude of the solar power that we bring in is sufficient to actually run the train system, suggesting that we would only use the grid when we need it, but that will depend on real world factors that are going on as we get there. But that is the process, and the program is to try to put that together. This energy grant that came to our attention was a grant for entities that do things that relieve some of the pressure on grids. And so we think that's what we're doing. And so that has been our program. Again, Meg and Dennis Kim and Real Property are sort of heading it up. I'm happy to have them come before the board and do a presentation.
I think
about
it'd be
what we're
helpful.
doing.
I think
Yeah.
it's great information. I don't know
Yeah.
the magnitude of it. I don't
Yeah.
know what the cost might be. If we do that as a government agency, and so you've got all these federal tax credits, which we really can't use, but are we not able to sell those tax credits into the marketplace?
I don't know the answer to that right now. It's something to look at and report back. The other thing is we would be, we think based on the fact that we can use so much off-grid power that we would be avoiding a lot of cost. And so that's something that, again, I have them come and report to the
Do you
board.
think that that's something that, rather than to put the pressure in the near term, is that a small adjunct that maybe could be added to just the workshop agenda, just to get a better, for
Absolutely.
the board to get a
Sure.
understanding of what it is you
Yep.
all are working in there?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Mr. Horgan.
Morning, Chair Richards
Good
and
morning.
F&A committee members. This morning, I'm going to run you through the April Central Valley Status Report. You should have a presentation in your pack.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So in terms of contractors' expenditure for the month of April, we had a total of 84.5 million. This was made up of the CP1 contract, which was 54 million. CP23 was 23 million, and CP4 was 7.4 million. We executed a total of 14 change orders in April for a value of approximately 12 million. And if we look at our risk contingency as of the end of April was just over 2 billion. Okay, next slide. Okay, in terms of construction labor, we had a big increase in April. As you can remember, or you may recall, March was a very wet month. We had a lot of flooding. So the construction labor went down significantly in March, but in April it came back up to steady state. We're back up to 1,246 construction workers, and that's continued to increase in May and June. Okay, in terms of construction progress, obviously the two main elements of our construction are the guideway and the structures. In terms of the structures, we have 70 structures either complete or in progress out of a total of 93. So that's 75%. In terms of the guideway, we've got 76% of the guideway that are fully completed or in progress. Next slide.
And Mr. Horgan, in
Yes.
that, have these remained flat for the last several months? Is it primarily the result of weather? Or has it just happened to be in the scale or the schedule for the project itself?
Primarily the schedule.
Okay. So it's not reflecting delays in it. It's just where it fits the schedule is a bit beyond where we are
Yes,
today.
but we have had some impact on the CP23 area for flooding.
Sure, I understood that
Yeah.
on that one, yeah. Okay.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, utility relocations. So we now have 57% of all utilities relocated. That's 1,034. And in addition, we have another 350 utilities in progress. That's where we started the relocation, but not completed yet. So that gives a total of 78% of utilities either relocated or in progress. Okay, in terms of real property, we got a magic number this month. 2,222 parcels of right-of-way delivered to the design build contractors. And there are only 71 parcels left to be delivered. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of environmental clearance, the big progress here is the Palmdale to Burbank. All the comments on the draft EIR and EIS have been incorporated, and draft finals have been prepared and submitted to the cooperating agencies for final review and comment.
Could I
And-
just make a comment on that? That's one of the two remaining environmental documents we have to complete. While Daniel's description of where we are is right, I just want to reiterate for the board, our intention is to finalize and release the final draft for that segment by December of this year. So coming back to the board shortly thereafter for
And
certification.
that's the result, that's for the federal requirements in the grant.
Yes.
Okay, in terms of project development, we've got, obviously, we're advancing design on the two extensions, the Merced and the Bakersfield extension. So the consultants are advancing the 30% design as we speak.
Daniel, if I could, I want the board members to know the flow of this stuff because there's a lot going on. So he talked about where we are on environmental. We have that wrapping, that first one in December of 2023. And then on this is the two design extensions for the Merced and Bakersfield extensions. The work with Stantec and HNTB on these is scheduled to get to that 30% design also by the end of the year. So we're progressing. And as we do that, we'll develop a right-of-way acquisition plan and a utility identification plan for relocating the utilities.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this slide shows the histogram of the combined contractors expenditures. That's CP 1 to 4. As you can see, April was 84 million. I will, at the flash report, I'll tell you what May was as well. May was a further increase, which is good news. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is a histogram and it shows the contingency drawdown. So we're projecting a contingency balance by the end of July of 1.8 billion. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is the basically trend line of construction labor. As you can see, we picked up significantly in April. That pickup will continue in May. And it should be very good for the summer months, especially with the increased activity on the CP4 section. Next slide, please. Okay, we've got two lines here. The top line is basically the guideway. And as you can see, Tom, there has been an increase of 2 miles in guideway in the last few months. But we are slightly ahead of target with the guideway production. In terms of structures, we've got 70 structures, which is the orange line, either complete or in construction. We are anticipating opening up a few more structures in the next 2 months. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the utility relocations. Obviously, utility relocations are critical to our success because until we relocate utilities, we can't place guideway and we can't complete bridges. So in the month of April, we relocated an additional 16 utilities. And as you can see, we're tracking here. We've got a target to have 1,216 utilities completed by year end. And presently, we are on track to achieve that. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is a lot of figures. It's a breakdown of the utilities on a contract basis and by whether they're electric, gas, telecoms, or wet. So the real highlight here is that the bulk of the utilities, gas, telecoms, and wet, are actually in CP1. The majority of the electric utilities are, however, in the CP2-3 contract. So in the city of Fresno, which is obviously in CP1, we have a significant amount of utilities to relocate there, but they're primarily gas, telecoms, and wet utilities.
Mr. Horgan, is this the schedule that Director Perea asked for?
That's correct.
Okay, and so you will be seeing this now every month?
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the right-of-way delivery schedule. So in the month of April, there were no right-of-way parcels delivered. However, we are down to 71 parcels of land remaining, and we are tracking to the schedule that Dennis Kim, our Chief of Right-of-Way and Third Parties, is monitoring very closely. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the delivery of the railroad parcels. So as of the end of April, we had 144 railroad parcels delivered. There's 27 remaining, and the remaining 27 parcels are on track for delivery on time and to schedule. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide shows the earned value for the CP4 contract. As you can see, our scheduled performance indicator is 0.98, which is good. The solid blue line shows you the actual progress. The dotted yellow line is sort of, we need to be above the dotted yellow line. So it is getting slightly close to the dotted yellow line, the actual, but there are two things that happened just recently, which give us great confidence that we're tracking to complete by the end of August. Firstly, we delivered all the right of way. So there was 2 remaining parcels, which was a half a mile of guideway. They have been delivered last week to the design build contractor, and we just completed all the utility designs. So the contractor is working vigorously. We've got 39 trucks moving dirt every day at the moment. We have the contractor working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in specific locations to expedite the works. And the contractor is in most areas, they're working 6 days a week now, 10-hour shifts. So there is a huge amount of activity. We have 261 construction workers on the CP4 area as we speak. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is just preliminary figures for the month of May. As you can see in the first table, construction labor is up. It's averaging at 1,280, which is good. We delivered 4 more parcels of land to the design build contractors in April as well. We executed 12 change orders for a total of 18 million. And we relocated 11 utilities in the month of May. Okay, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Horgan? All right. Like this, Daniel. This is great. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, unless any of my colleagues on the committee have any comments they'd like to make, and I don't think I see them. Thank you for being with us. This will conclude the work of this committee today. Please, if you're able, join us at 10 o'clock for the full board meeting for June the 29th. With that, the meeting is now adjourned.